United States is losing in economic competition against other nations whose mercantilistic strategies are destroying our manufacturing jobs, critical industries, our standard of living, our national security, the security of our food supply, and our children's futures. The threat to the U.S. economy and national security is grave. Other trade nations are using comprehensive strategies to import jobs across all economic sectors, but are particularly focused on strategically significant technologies and industries. U.S. companies in these sectors face not only wide-ranging mercantilistic practices. By mercantilism, we're talking about state-owned, predatory prices, predatory tax, economic aggression, not private enterprise, open free market economies. U.S. companies in these sectors face not only a wide range of mercantilist practices and non-tariff trade barriers, such as currency manipulation, tariffs, and subsidies, but also more sophisticated and specific strategies aimed at identifying and acquiring or otherwise controlling critical technologies. Tactics used include using unusually large direct and indirect subsidies, joint ventures with both corporations and U.S. universities, requiring the transfer or licensing of their technology, corporate acquisitions, and for certain countries, systematic theft of intellectual property. We have a choice. It's our choice to make. We need to make the right one. The United States can continue to allow anything mined, manufactured, grown, or serviced to be outsourced to countries with predatory trade practices and policies. And by so doing, leave the United States dependent on foreign, sometimes adversarial, sources of critical components of military systems and equipment. Shut out of the industries of the future that create wealth and opportunity. And with ballooning foreign debt, unacceptably slow growth, and significant underemployment, fewer good-paying jobs, and growing income inequality. Or the United States can reassert itself as a great manufacturing nation and a producing nation with a rising standard of living for all. We can develop and implement a comprehensive strategy that that retains and reinforces our leadership in innovation, locates investment and production in the United States, and raises employment by creating good-paying jobs. Our mission is to win the international competition for good jobs, sustain real economic growth, and prosperity, with a national strategy to counter foreign mercantilism, balance trade, and grow strong domestic supply chains. Now, what I want to do is get into what is going on with the administration, what you're experiencing, some of which is difficult to deal with. No more difficult than what we in the steel industry had to deal with when countries were dumping their product at predatory prices and destroying our profitability for the last 10 years. Everybody is impacted by this. All Americans are, our future is. Now, Trump is kind of a unique guy. He's not a politician, and it shows. He grew up in New York, and in New York, you kind of go at it. If somebody gives you a hard time, you give it right back times two. That's how he grew up. There's things that people like about him, there's things that people don't like about him. What I'm here to talk about today is what he's doing to improve our global competitiveness. That's why I joined his team on trade as a strategic advisor and on economy. That's why I joined the administration on the ACPIN, which advises the USTR on trade policy and negotiations. And that's why we started the Coalition for a Prosperous America back in 2007 to deal with these issues. But before I start, I'd like to tell a little story that many of you have probably heard before. I apologize if any of what I have to say is offensive. I will use words that could be interpreted different ways, okay? So bear with me. But there's this old story, and it really describes what we're kind of having to deal with today. about this bird flying along in a blizzard. And the bird is just getting colder and colder and colder. Finally, it falls to the ground frozen. And it's dying. Out in the field, there's a herd of cattle. One of the cows comes over and lays a turd of manure on top of them. Well, that warm manure starts to revive the bird. And the bird is so happy that it's alive, it starts chirping. And chirping and chirping and chirping. Then, in that same field, comes along this cat. The cat hears the chirping bird, removes the manure and eats the bird. Now, there's a moral to the story. Not everyone who dumps on you is your enemy. Not everyone who digs you out of the dump is your friend. So we can agree to disagree on stuff. We need to keep the big picture in mind here. That's what we're doing. The book strategy that we worked on during the campaign and since then is to improve our global competitiveness as a country, as a nation, as a people. Like it or not, there is no such thing as world peace and kumbaya in the world. We want that, but we're seem to keeps eluding us from decade to decade. The hard reality is there are things that are going on in the world that if we don't check and stop and reverse, will do us extreme harm and damage. And the last time I checked, despite all the rhetoric from governments around the world, they're not in any hurry to see the United States relinquish its leadership role to the Chinese. For good reason. Our 4-point economic plan that the president outlined during the campaign was very straightforward. It involved tax reform, trade reform, regulatory reform, and energy reform. It also involved rebuilding our infrastructure, because without a 22nd century infrastructure, you can't be a globally competitive economy and nation. Ports, bridges, roads, airports, air traffic control systems, you name it. The infrastructure is vast and all-encompassing. Each reform is significant by itself, capable of standing on its own in the discussions as to why it's important. But the beauty of the 4-point strategy are the synergies that take place when you execute on all 4 of them together. Sometimes we overuse the word synergies. You know, when you do acquisitions, the other side always wants you to pay for synergies. You know, they're not hard numbers. They're kind of out there in the cloud. Oh, they're there, and if you buy our company, you'll get all these synergies, you know. I remember all the acquisitions Nucor did while I was CEO, some 38 of them. We never paid any attention to the synergies. We figured if they came to us, great, but we're not going to pay for them ahead of time. Synergies that we have here are real. By putting in place a competitive international tax system, by stopping the trade cheating and trade mercantilism and predatory pricing of state-owned entities, state-owned economies, by making sure our regulations are strong but not overdone to the point where we can't compete. When it takes us 6 years to get a permit to build a steel plant or any other manufacturing facility. We're bringing reason back to the regulations. A lot of people don't talk about it, but there's been big changes, and for the better. All designed to improve our global competitiveness. Same thing with energy reform. The cost of energy, now being a global exporter of things like natural gas and oil. All have improved our global competitiveness. And and they all strengthen each other. It's not 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. It's more like equals 12. And if you don't believe me, just take a look at what's happened in the economy the last 2 years versus the previous 10. The economy is firing at all cylinders. Wages are starting to go up. Unemployment rates are down. Not everything is where we need it to be. We've got a couple of trade deals that are going to be working in our favor. And we're going to lay the foundation for other trade agreements that deal with some of the more egregious trade mercantilists in the world. I don't believe it takes a rocket scientist to see how these 4 areas, when done properly, to improve our competitiveness globally, provide us with those huge synergies and the opportunity to improve our global competitiveness. And as the President has said, and as others have said, the United States is open for business again. Build your plants here. Grow your facilities in the United States to serve our market and to export to the rest of the world, not the other way around. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about are some of the issues involving trade. For the last 25 years, a certain state-owned economy has been waging a trade war against the United States. 25 years. A lot of us have been fighting that war, but without the resources to win it. Until now. The American people said enough's enough. This administration is saying enough's enough. We understand what you are. You've made it very clear. You're out to dominate the world. And we've allowed ourselves to become weak at your expense. We believed when we allowed China to come into the WTO to gain permanent nation-favored trading status that they would live up to their promises. The promises that said we will be a market economy, a market-based economy. We'll reduce state ownership of our economy and our businesses dramatically. They did just the opposite for the last 25 years. And what drove this home was most recently Chairman Xi, now Emperor for life, came out with his China 2025 policy. And he said, his words were, China 2025 is about us dominating the industries of the future, not being a global trading participant with the rest of the world and be part of developing these technologies, but to dominate the world through these technologies. Those are his words, not mine. He even scared a lot of the folks in China, a lot of the leaders in China. But what he did also do is he made the rest of the world stand up and take notice. To all those who have been saying, see, we told you, this is what they've been all about all along. Now they're going to take the same tactics that they use to undermine our steel industry, undermine our solar panel industry, undermine other industries in this country. And they're going to apply them to the industries of the future, to semiconductors, to aerospace, to space, to pharmaceutical, intellectual to artificial intelligence. You named the industry of the future, they named it. They don't want to work with the world as they promised when they joined the WTO. They want to dominate and control. To do that, they have to undermine the United States of America. And we've allowed them to do that. We thought that by allowing them to come into the WTO, to give them permanent nation trading status, which was a requirement to get into the WTO, that they would live up to their commitments and promises. And now they've made it very clear they are going to do just the opposite, and they're going to repeat the same strategy that's worked for them so well over the last 25 years. And what this president is saying, what the American people put him in office to say is, enough is enough. We're not going to take it anymore. We are going to fight back while we still have the leverage to do it. And we've lost a lot of leverage, make no mistake about it. And I'd be very surprised if there weren't people in this room that have seen their customers disappear, their competitors disappear, or might be relying on product and equipment coming from China to do their business. So, what is the administration doing? Well, you've heard about the 232. You heard about the 301. Now, a lot of people mistaken the idea that somehow the 232 program is designed just for steel and aluminum. That's completely untrue. When Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross came out and announced 232 actions because of the threats to our national defense, he mentioned 9 strategic industries. Oh, they just happen to be the same ones the Chinese said they were going to dominate China 2025. Steel and aluminum were just the first because they're the ones that have been under attack the longest. But the 232 program, make no mistake about it, is about national defense. And I defy anybody to make a serious argument that you can be a leader, one of the leaders, the leader of the world if you don't have a strong manufacturing base and you don't have a strong steel industry. It's not going to happen. You want proof? China made the steel industry a strategic industry back in 2000 in their country. They would not let any companies come into their country and build a steel plant. They built 1 billion tons, 1 billion, not a million, 1 billion tons of steelmaking capacity, virtually all owned by the government or controlled by the government. They understood what it meant to their future desires to dominate the world in all facets of economic development and military development. They understood what it meant. They needed a steel industry to do it. They wouldn't have a strong manufacturing sector without it. So they made it strategic. Now, if they were a true market economy like they promised to be, how would they have handled the fact that they thought they were going to need a lot more steel in their country? Well, in a market economy, the market says, keep building until you get to a point where you built so much you can't make a profit. Because an open market economy, a market-based economy, is a profit-driven economy. So, they built 1 billion tons. There was already 500 million tons of excess capacity in the world. So if they were a true market-based economy like they promised, the A would not have been state-owned, and B, what would they have done? They would have built 400 million tons of steelmaking capacity, and then let the rest of the world supply the rest that they needed. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's why they joined the WTO, supposedly. That's why we let them in. A true market-based economy uses the global economy so that it can use its capital the most efficient way possible. That doesn't mean you build another 500 million tons of excess capacity in the world. The market would never let you do that. That's what they did to the steel industry. The steel industry historically has been through, like all manufacturers, the normal economic cycle, ups and downs. Things are good, we overdo it, things slow down, things kind of equilibrate, then we take off again. Demographics keep pushing us in the right direction. We all understand normal business cycle. What industry like steel has had to deal with is a second cycle that overlaps the normal economic cycle. It's what I've coined to be the dumping cycle. That's where events elsewhere in the world that not necessarily influencing our economic cycle say to the rest of the world, we can't sell our steel. We got to find another home for it. Happened in 1995 when you had the Asian crisis. Prior to that, you had the Soviet Union collapse. 300, 400, 500 million tons of steelmaking capacity in Russia only had 50 million tons of domestic demand. What were they going to do with it? Well, they dumped it into China, they dumped it into the United States, they dumped it into Europe. And then you had the Asian crisis. So they couldn't take it anymore. So where'd they send it to? They sent more of it here because we're the truly only open market for steel in the world. The rest of the world has various controls, non-tariff trade barriers to moderate it. It all came here. What happened? 38 companies went out of business in 2001, 2002. So the global industry went to its leaders and said, we need to do something about this excess capacity. Governments of the world, especially those that own your industries, need to allow us to consolidate the global steel industry, take out the excess capacity, be 100% or near 100% privately owned, i.e. investor owned versus government owned. Prior to us doing that and getting the world's governments to cooperate, including what we did with the 201 with President Bush, it only lasted 18 months, but it was there for the critical period necessary to do the global consolidation. What that allowed us to do was to take a steel industry that was 65% government owned in the world, 65% owned by the governments of the world, and turn it into an industry that was only 15% owned by the governments of the world. 15%. 85% dominated by for-profit, investor-owned companies. Market-based economy, steel industry. And things started to take off and do really well for everybody, including our customers. Then China decided they're going to make a strategic industry out of steel. They built 1 billion tons. And where are we today? Where have we been since 2010? 2008? We're back to where we've got 65% of the world steel industry owned by state government, federal, state governments, state-owned, country-owned governments, principally China. Now we're back into this massive oversupply, which never should have been there to begin with if they truly lived up to their promises to be a market-based economy and play by the rules of trade. Now, I'm not going to get into how they got away with it, except to tell you that everybody involved is to blame. The WTO, the United States, everybody who thought that this was going to be a great thing and open up their markets to the world, as opposed to being a market where they just exported back to their home country where the manufacturing used to be and destroy their industries. So here we are today. We got a steel industry that's very capital intensive. One of the most capital intensive industries in the world. Same thing with aluminum. The president decides we need to do something. It's going to impact our ability to defend ourselves. Our supply chains are in trouble. The steel industries are in trouble. A lot of our manufacturing sectors are going to be threatened if they're not already. So the first action out of the box was a 232. Again, the first 232 action was on steel and aluminum. Why? Because between 2008 and 2017 inclusive, the return on the cost of capital for the steel industry in this country was near zero. Zero. Now some companies like Nucor were better off. Steel Dynamics, better off. Our cost of capital was only 4 to 5%, not zero or negative. The problem was not our cost of capital, our return on capital. Our return on capital was around 4 to 5%. Overall, the industry was zero, so you know there was a bunch of negative. But the problem is, what was the cost of capital? The cost of capital on average for the steel industry was 11%. For For Nucor, 9%. How long can you go on investing, making sure you have the latest in technology, keeping those capital-intensive plants operating, adopting the newest technologies, inventing the newest technology? How long can you do that when your cost of capital is higher by a factor of 2 or 10 than your return on capital? You can't do it. Any of you folks that are here own your own businesses, you can't do it unless you've got, the Koch brothers or Soros sitting behind you just feeding you money because they got nothing better to do with the money. You can't do it in the real world. The industry was in that kind of danger, and that's why they took the action they did. That's why they're not going away anytime soon. But it's just spit in the ocean. A spit in the ocean of the overall effort to improve our global competitiveness. And if you take the trade segment out of that, to look at it under a microscope, it's a spit in the ocean to the overall effort that is taking place to get the global trading system back to being what it was supposed to be: reciprocal, fair, and balanced. That's what the WTO and GATT were supposed to do. We got hoodwinked by short-term returns, by the dollar signs, by, we can make more money if we put our plant over there instead of do it here. The problem is we created a monster. We didn't say enough's enough. You read my book, same thing happened with respect to Japan and Germany after World War II. China's just doing it to like a 10,000 times degree bigger because of the size of China compared to those nations. We're not against China having economic growth, providing for its people, having a strong middle class in China. Just the opposite. Everybody went into this with the idea that that's what would happen. The problem is the opposite has happened. You've got a totalitarian state that imprisons people that don't agree with them, millions of them, castrates the folks in Tibet, burns the churches of any denomination, any Christian churches, and so on and so on. It's not freedom. That's not the kind of country that people in the world were hoping China was going to become. And what did they do? They doubled down on it with their China 2025 policy. They've been doubling down on the oppression over the last several years as well. The world has got a serious problem. The world cannot afford for the United States of America not to be there to be a counterbalancing strong one. This is much bigger than any one product, any one industry. This is about the future well-being of our nation and the world. And you watch, more and more nations in the world are going to be jumping on our bandwagon. 232 steel and aluminum, now automobiles. Well, what does that mean? Well, our automobiles are a strategic industry for our country to be able to have a strong national defense and supply chains to support it. That's being determined. But we also looked at aerospace. That's one of the other ones that's in that list. And pharmaceuticals is on that list. And artificial intelligence is on that list. And semiconductors is on that list. That would be the same list that China 2025 has. No surprise there. It's how you go about doing it that's the critical issue. And whether you're doing it in conjunction with the world or at the expense of the world. $11:34. Oh, we got plenty of time. I'm just getting warmed up. There's something here I want to pull up on my phone. Just bear with me. There it is. Now, they asked me to say, well, what's the implication of all this for steel and aluminum and some of the other industries the government is going to stand up for? Remember now, we have been in a trade war for 25 years that we didn't start. Just the opposite. We did everything we could to help China grow and prosper. And so did our multinational companies. So did our government and the government of the world. And instead, what did we get? We got a trade war waged against us for 25 years that has decimated our middle class in middle America, undermined our manufacturing, despite what you might hear from NAM. You know the supply chains, where they are and where they're not. What did the government just come out and do? Our Defense Department came out and said, we can no longer supply parts we need for our military. They did a study that went down 5 levels in the supply chain and said, shh, oot. We're getting our stuff from people that don't like us, the people that want to destroy us. This can't be like this. We've got to reestablish our supply chains. So that's where automotive comes in. That's where all the rest of these things come in. Got to reestablish those supply chains. Otherwise, you don't have a manufacturing sector that stands on its own 2 feet. What you end up with is a country that is nothing more than an island nation. You know what an island nation is? We ship our raw materials and everything someplace else. They make everything and ship it back to us. How can you be a world leader and be a counterbalance in the world if that's your economic model? Trump refuses that to acknowledge that's the right thing to do, as the rest of us do, as millions of us do. Well, I do want to leave some time for Q&A, but I do want to talk about the Coalition for Prosperous America. That's the CPA, which I'm chairman of, which we started back in 2007. Why? Because the business roundtables of the world, the NAMs, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's, we're all out there supporting the multinational, being China enablers and not standing up for domestic manufacturing and the future strength of our economy. Everybody said we don't need manufacturing. We can be a service-oriented country. We can be prosperous and be a global leader through services. Yeah. What are services? Front desk jobs at the hotel. Phone banks. Restaurant jobs. Do you know that of all the jobs created between 2008 and 2016, 65% were in low-pay, low-hour service jobs. What does that mean? Low pay, less than 18 bucks an hour. Low hour, less than 30 hours a week. That's where the jobs are being created. Not in the high-paying manufacturing side and those companies that live off the manufacturing and the whole supply chain. Trump is changing all that. Whether you like him or not, you've got to understand that this is about something bigger than one person. This is about the future of our country. This is more than one industry. It's more than one country. The CPA is a movement that started in 2007 and today counts among its membership over 4.6 million households. Farmers, ranchers, unions, small, medium, large manufacturers. Now more than ever, we have to make the movement bigger and better. Yeah, that's why I got those things on the chairs. We need you to go and join with us. But I always believe in putting your money where your mouth is, as opposed to your pocket. We need you to join with us. The form on your chairs, please look at it. I'm not going to say anything more until I see somebody look at it. Grab your pen. Fill out the form. It's a free membership. It's free for 1 year. like you not to leave here without giving me your signed copy, filled out. Remember, it's free, and it's not one of those things where if you don't stop it, the membership next year, it automatically renews. No, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't renew unless you think that there's some value in it. And it doesn't cost you an arm and a leg to become a member. You can do it for 25 bucks. You can also text the word START to the number 202-798-0987. 202-798-0987. That will get you on our list for follow-up. It's entirely up to you. 202-798-0987. Thank you for allowing me to give you that little bit of a spiel. Again, ladies and gentlemen, this nation is at a crossroads. We've been under attack by an economic aggressor who has one thought in mind: to dominate, not to share, to control their own people, to persecute them, to put them in internment camps by the millions, to hold hostage entire countries like Tibet. The world knows what's going on. And they all know that we need to come together. My bet is we do. My bet is China gets the message and they start living up to the agreements they made to join the world economic system. If they don't, it's going to be very expensive for them. We have no choice but to engage in the war that's been waged against us. We have no choice. We may not like it. We may not like the way it affects us and our businesses, but this is a bigger issue. You can choose to agree with that, you can choose not to. You can choose to be a champion for us, you can be a champion against us. That's your freedom. My bet is when you look at this, when you go to the CPA website, after you join, or even if you don't join, prosperousamerica.org, and you look at all the issues that we're laying out. We don't just put articles that we write, we put articles that the rest of the world writes. And that's where I want to close. If you've been paying attention to the news lately, you've seen the Vice President of the United States come out and say, enough is enough. You've seen our State Department come out and said, enough is enough. And with the trade agreements that are being negotiated, the new United States-Mexico Canada agreement, there's clauses in there to deal with state-owned enterprises, state-owned economies, trade mercantilism, currency manipulation. That's just the beginning. Let's see. White House report, China's trade domination hinders U.S. manufacturing base. Remarks delivered by President Mike Pence on the administration's policy towards China at the Hudson Institute. August trade deficit with China hits $53.2 billion, a new record. You think we're going to change this giant battleship of a trade war overnight? It's going to take years to do it. Trump administration details blueprint to rebuild key manufacturing sectors. The U.S.-China trade battle spawns a new era of tariff dodgers. This issue is front and center. The United States is fully engaged. It's not one man. It's our Defense Department. It's our domestic manufacturers who are now being told, we don't need you in China anymore, and have been for years. It's not just Trump, since Trump got in there. We don't need you anymore. We're going to create Chinese lookalikes and put you out of business. They even go so far as to come into your plant at night when you're not there and make the same product you're making during the day. You don't believe it? It's true. Times 100. We want China to be successful. We don't want them to be successful at the world's expense and at our expense. They want to be a leader, great. Join us in the way to be a leader the right way. Fair